Happy Father's Day to all of you fathers. Happy Father's Day to you fathers who will be fathers. And I pray that the message from God's Word today will be helpful to each and every one of you. I guess would that be Stephanie, your class? Stephanie's maybe in the training room. Sharon, your class that put these together just because it is a competition. Fathers, I've got 3 of these. So actually I only got 1 for, I did get 2 from her. Yeah, I got Super Dad, Special Man, and my favorite, because it came from Ella, and Russ can see this, Ella gave me number 1 dad, Russ. Like I said, just because it is a competition. And so those are my acclimates for the day. Father's Day. What a great opportunity to honor our fathers, to be mindful as fathers of our responsibility to be good and faithful leaders, the daunting task that lies on each one of us. I've been so blessed in my life, I believe certainly entirely by God, and mostly because of my faith in Jesus Christ, and more particular, those who surround me, who've lived faithful lives to Jesus Christ. I've been blessed with a tremendous extended family, both physically and spiritually. I have had and have a family that's more precious than I could ever deserve. And then I married, Andy, you can probably relate to this, out of my league. And I thought I don't deserve what God has blessed me with. And then my children have come along. There's been nothing scarier in my life. Nothing I've been so inept at. And nothing that is near the blessing of being able to be a father. I thought I was going to be the father of 2 precious children, and God even helped me get over that fear of 3. What a tremendous blessing. And fathers, we can be grateful for that and thankful for that. But there's also responsibility. And I want to encourage you fathers to be fathers that bring hope. There's not much hope in this world. And I believe very unintentionally that even godlier Christian people diminish the idea of hope. I was watching a video this morning as I'm shaving parts and getting ready, where an individual says, I want to build the biggest building in town, the tallest building in town. Now, for Summerville, that wouldn't be very impressive. I do want to build the biggest building in town. He said something very interesting to me. He says, I want to do it by building the biggest tower in town. You know how most people try and do it? By tearing other buildings down. I think there's a message there for fathers. We want to build the biggest building in town, but we want to do it by building ours up, not by tearing any down. And I believe that gets at the very idea is fathers having a responsibility to bring hope to our families, to our societies, and to the world abroad. We see a lot going on around us today. We see a lot of real and significant needs. But what we don't see much of is leaders that are bringing character and hope to those around them. The 112th Psalm, and I encourage you, if you would, to take notes today, because I've chosen, rather than to stay in one location and go into detail to one passage, to rather take a broad look. And we're not going to have time to delve into all the passages I give you today, but I encourage you to write them down as you go throughout this week to look into these passages. Kevin read for us from the 112th Psalm, and he read that entire psalm that talks about men who bring hope. And it applies to more than men, but in its immediate context, the psalmist is saying the man who fears God, praises God, his life and the life of those around him will look like this. And what a message of hope we heard read from that 112th Psalm. How then, as fathers, do we do that? How do we bring hope to those who are around us? I believe in Luke, the first chapter, that we see one of the fundamental and very important and oftentimes missed messages of bringing hope to those who are around us, that we would expect greatness. I said earlier that sometimes we very unintentionally diminish hope. It's a sad thing to me, and I've become cognizant of it, and I try to avoid it as best I can. It's a sad thing to see parents limit their children. And yet we do it. Oh, you'll never do that. Oh, you're not going to be able to get there. You're not enough. You don't have enough. Boy, that's easy to do. And it is destructive to do. I was teasing Evie this morning. She and Anna were at Dad's trail ride all week, and they ran. Evie told us before she left Sunday night, said, I'll have to come home and sleep on Wednesday, Dad. I said, you do realize you can take a few hours out of each day and sleep out there. She just looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. And when she got out of the vehicle last night, she moseyed into the house and she flopped down on the floor and was out cold. And I woke her up and I said, honey, don't you want to go to bed? She said, yeah. And so she got up the stairs, and of course she sleeps on the third floor, so she got to the second and flopped down, and there she was out again. And that time I picked her up and I carried her up the stairs to her bed. She was completely exhausted. But parents who expect greatness, this morning, because she was so exhausted, she says, Mom, can I have a drink of your coffee? I said, Evie, are you sure you want to stunt your growth anymore? Now, for those of you that don't know Evie well, she wants to be a great basketball player. She works at it, and she works on her ball handling skills and her shooting. But what she would really like is about another 3 feet of height. You know what I tell her all the time, Evie, it's not about size. You do what you can with what you have. And you accomplish what you set your heart to. Oftentimes, as parents, as friends, as neighbors, are we in the place of telling people your dreams aren't worth it, you can never accomplish it? We share that because the world has taught us to share these things. Zechariah was much in that boat. Zechariah goes into the temple in Luke, the first chapter. And the angel appears to him, In verse 15, I'd love to read the entire passage, but verse 15 is what's most relevant to what we're looking at today. The angel tells him of his coming child, for he will be great before the Lord. And he must not drink wine or strong drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit, even from his mother's womb. He says he's going to be great. Of course, that's talking about John the Baptist. And we can say he was great. You know what Zechariah said? He said what you and I have said so many times. What? Are you sure? Have you seen the age of my wife? Do you know how old I am? We don't have children. Gabriel says, I'm Gabriel. This is going to happen. You need a sign? How about this? This isn't really in the context or in the text, excuse me, but here's what I see because I've said this to my children. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. That's exactly what the angel of God says to Zechariah. You'll not speak until this child is born. We need to expect great things. We need to expect great things out of our children. We need to expect great things in our congregation. We need to expect great things in our society and in our culture. And great things will occur in our family and in our communities and in our society and in our culture if we have great leaders, if we are the leaders that God has called us to be. Secondly, we need fathers who give all to God. You know, when I think of great fathers, Genesis, the 22nd chapter, is not one of those chapters that come to my mind. And it's certainly not the chapter that Christian is going to tell you that he wants me to model myself after. Because in Genesis, the 22nd chapter, there Abraham takes Isaac and he takes him to the altar and he prepares to kill his son. And you say, well, that's not a very good father. Until we understand the underlying principles that God says, I want you to give me your family. My family is important to me, but I must make sure that God is more important. I think in a very subtle way, this is kind of what Jesus is talking about in Mark, the 8th chapter. In verse 34 and following, he says, in calling the crowd to him with his disciples, he said to them, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever would save his life will lose it, but whosoever loses his life for my sake in the Gospels will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in glory of his Father with his holy angels. Jesus says whoever would save his life will lose it, and whoever would lose it for his sake will gain it. As fathers, we need to be leaders that are willing to give all to God. I believe in turning our families over completely and wholly to God, that it's only in that we can gain our families, that we can win our families, that we can be used through our families. Thirdly, we need fathers who are trainers. Does this look familiar, Chris? Most of you, I can't imagine, know Ken McNabb, but he's a great nationally known trainer. Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. And there's so much hurt that results out of that verse that sometimes we miss what it's really getting at. You see, I told you I am inept as a father. I have been scared from the day Christian was born, and way more scared the first day we brought him home from McGee Hospital. Amanda had to stay a few extra days, and so we were in the hospital for 3 or 4 days. And it wasn't too bad parenting there when you had nurses and doctors to, jump in there and take care of things for you when you needed it. But when I brought him home and I had no idea what he needed or when he was going to need it, I was scared. I have been for the rest of my life, but a principle occurred to me, and I believe it's a biblical principle. You see, I have a great deal of confidence when it comes to horses, and I can achieve what I want the majority of the time out of horses. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to treat this little thing like a foal. F-O-A-L, by the way. I think Amanda and I have benefited greatly from using horse training principles in our parenting. But there's something to be said about this, because fathers, parents in general, but certainly fathers, need to train. Too much in our society, we are passengers. We are being dominated by little beings that don't know enough about the world to know how to even get themselves some food. And yet they're in charge. And they're making all the decisions. I watched a trainer, it wasn't Ken, but I watched a trainer doing a demonstration. He was asked to work with this horse, and the horse tramped on him. He had a dressage whip in his left hand, and he smacked the front leg of that horse and did some exercise with it and was going about. And with that, a lady stands up. She says, that was mean. It was her horse she asked to work with. She wanted to take the horse out of the demonstration. He said, mean? He says, yes. She said, yes. Why would you hit my horse like that? He says, let me tell you, ma'am, what mean is. See, you have already got a 5-year-old horse here that has no manners, that was willing to invade my space and step on me. And it's not going to be very long until it breaks someone's leg, and then you want to know what's going to happen to this horse? It's going to be euthanized. That is mean. Brothers and sisters, friends and neighbors, we must train our children, because there are, as we've studied in weeks past, predicaments coming, calamities upon us, and our children must be prepared. They must be trained. Fathers who appropriately discipline. It's a big part of training. 1 Samuel, the 2nd chapter, in verses 22 through 26, I even hesitate to use the example because Eli was a great man of God. But he failed his sons miserably. And he is rebuked by God himself for having not disciplined his sons. Fathers who appropriately discipline. I think it goes hand in hand with what we just talked about, that this is an idea that is falling out of favor with our society. And the fruits that are being and will be harvested from that thought process that discipline is a bad thing are horrible and rottenest fruits. Ephesians, the 6th chapter, in verse 4, I was just trying to gather my thoughts because I'm going to quote it from the King James if I don't turn there. But there in the King James it says Fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. I was turning there because the ESV uses a word we're a little bit more familiar with. He says, provoke your children not to anger. One more chapter over. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. You see, when we think of discipline, a lot of times we think of punishment. And there is an arm of discipline that's punishment. But discipline goes much deeper than solely punishment. And I think that's exactly what Ephesians, the 6th chapter, is getting at. You see, if all we do is punish our children, we will provoke them to wrath and anger and even hatred. The concept of godly discipline is to bring the child up with discipline in instruction. You see, when we talk about being disciplined, we're not talking about punishment. We're talking about a controlled lifestyle. Oh, I do have it here. For the longest time, I'd been leaving this in my vehicle on Sundays. This is probably the most addictive thing we have in our societies. And for any that don't know this, I encourage you to look it up. But the use of phones releases endorphins, very much the same as alcohol. Many younger than myself, when they're not feeling so hot, when they're a little bit depressed, will send out texts, right? Send them out. You youngsters don't talk like this. Gabe, you'd have to tell me what you text, but we would have texted, "What's up?" It's not what you text, right? I don't text that either. There was no texting when I was saying that. Sending out to 10 people. Why? Because we feel good. We get a response. A little shot of endorphin. Flash from one thing to another. One of the things I like to do to decompress is go in Christian's room with Christian and play a video game. It's okay to have hobbies. It's okay to have things to relieve stress. But one of the things that's happening with these electronics is that we are living undisciplined lives. And in time when we ought to be achieving and getting useful skills, we are wasting, and worse yet, harming with addictions. Young folks, do not misunderstand me. I'm not telling you these are all bad. The technology that we have to do what we've been doing during this time of quarantine has come because of our millennials being so intent on keeping connected through technology. We've benefited in such a wonderful way from that. But we must be disciplined. Every father should have some kind of a study, some kind of continued education that's taking place. He doesn't like my books. He complained the entire time we made the bookshelves for them. He agrees with Amanda that I ought to have electronic books. Not all those books in my office. They may have a point. I don't agree with them. They may have a point. But as we get back to technology, aren't there so many ways? We have more information at our fingertips than ever before. You could go on YouTube and learn for a decade if you use it properly. We need fathers who appropriately discipline and teach discipline to their children and to those around. Fifthly, we need fathers who pray. John, the 4th chapter, is an example of something that is awful to experience. There in John, the 4th chapter, an officer comes to Jesus, and his child is sick to the point of death. Now, you may read this as the official pleads with Jesus, says, "Come, save my child." You may say, well, what does that have to do with prayer? This officer is at a loss. His child is beyond anything that he can do to physically help. And notice where he goes. He goes to Jesus. If you would, follow with me. The 4th chapter, John, starting in 46. And so he came again to Canaan in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And at Capernaum, there was an official whose son was ill. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and to heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." The officer said, "Sir, come down before my child dies." We talked a couple weeks ago about Jacob latching a hold of the angel and saying, "Bless me. I'm not going to let you go until you bless me." It's interesting to me, oftentimes Jesus is moved with compassion and immediately performs a miracle, but it's interesting to me that people come out of their way to Jesus asking him for a favor, and he says or does things to repel them. This isn't the only example. Why? He's demonstrating where they are. This man says, "Lord, come." He's intent on going to Jesus. Little Jace, it's amazing seeing him run around here. A week ago, he tried to jump out the window in the back. During announcements, I went running back, grab a hold of him. He's so active. He's loud when he's not in the training room. You can hear him in our midst. It's a scary thing. In NICU, Children's Hospital with Stephanie and Russ, is his life hung in the balance with meningitis. We did a lot of praying. Wasn't much else we could do. It's amazing to me with the assault on masculinity that I believe we've seen in our culture, that we experience, that somehow men could possibly still be too proud to pray and to pray with their children. The simplest and quite possibly one of the most effective things we can do with a leader is to spend time in prayer, in private and in public and with one another. is we think about Luke, the 15th chapter. We think about something that this world tells us is a weakness. I believe this young man's brother certainly saw forgiveness as a weakness. But we need fathers who lead in the very difficult area of forgiveness. I've tried to discipline myself. I've tried to develop a habit of when my children, or for that matter, an employee doesn't admit a mistake, to point it out and to emphasize it. But when a mistake is understood and known, to let it go. It's hard sometimes. I mean, buy a brand new rug and within a week, I don't know where, we always have grape juice at our house, I guess. Maybe that's the problem. But there will be a glass that's spilled on that rug. I'm sorry, Daddy. Is not a time for harshness. You think about what we call the prodigal son. You think about what he did. He was obstinate. He was demanding. He took what was not rightfully his at the time he took it and took it out and wasted it. He understood his position. He understood what he deserved. And the picture of the Father, and by the way, the only time in Scripture we see God depicted is running. Is running to meet that son. The son had all these things prepared. Father, I'm not worthy. Father, if I can just be a servant. And if you notice in the verses before he meets his father, he's rehearsing that speech, and the father never even lets him finish. Because he's too intent on preparing a meal, a feast for forgiveness. We need fathers who lead the way in forgiveness. If you would, turn to 1 Kings. I will leave you with this last thought from 1 Kings, the 2nd chapter. And I don't think there's a better example when we talk about fathers who leave a godly legacy than David. Because as I was thinking about fathers, and I was trying to finalize what I was going to speak on this morning, I thought about David. I thought about all the lessons of fatherhood that I can learn from dealing with him and Absalom. Where David violated so many of the very examples that we looked at here this morning. But if fathers had to be perfect, I would be childless. David left a great legacy, not because he was perfect, not because he didn't make horrific and long-lasting mistakes, but because his heart was set on God. I can't tell you how many times I've sat my children down and said, your father was wrong. I'm thankful for the teaching and education of Charles Dobson, as that's a principle that I learned from his literature. There's instinctual men, especially amongst us, to never admit when we're wrong, right? That's a sign of weakness. In actuality, it takes great strength to admit when one is wrong. And our children need to know that we are wrong. Our children need to know that I make mistakes, but that my aim and my standard is above my actions. David's a wonderful example. There are some people who accomplish great things and yet are forgotten throughout history. There are some people who accomplish what they think are great things, and as time goes on, their reputation is tarnished in such a way that they're not seen as great people at all. And then there are other people whose reputation and legacy grows and becomes richer and richer as time goes on. Abraham Lincoln is respected far more today than he ever was in his lifetime. Winston Churchill is another example of an individual who is respected more today than the day he died. Fathers, may we live such a life. May we focus on character both in ourselves and that which we share. That the richness of our memory would grow sweeter by the day. And the reality is that there is but one way to accomplish that, one lasting accomplishment in all the world. In 1 Kings, the 2nd chapter, we read, when David's time to die drew near, he commanded Solomon his son, saying, I am about to go the way of the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn. That the Lord may establish his word that he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons pay close attention to their way and walk before me in faithfulness with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. As so many of the points that I've strove to draw out today conclude or point to, the best thing I can do as a father is to point my children to Jesus Christ. I sometimes have thought about what I would say to my children in my dying words if I'd ever find myself in that occasion. And I've oftentimes think that the most useful admonition I could have in that position would be to encourage them to stay faithful to the Lord. But the fact of the matter is, fathers, that my actions today, tomorrow, and for weeks to come will speak louder to my children than any dying words ever could. As we think about fathers today, I am mindful of our Heavenly Father, that great example, who is lovingly and caringly waiting for you. If you've not turned your life over to him, he anxiously awaits and encourages you to do so this morning. If you have a spiritual need that we can help you with, I encourage you as we stand and sing to make that known and to allow us to help you in whatever way we can.